Hi everybody, I'm Daniel Mettler from Dnn Internet Solutions. We're the makers of Dnn-Sxc, and today I'm going to show you how to really integrate Angular into DNN in the perfect way so that you have hot reloading while development, you have staging additions for checking it out with your customers, you can access DNN data while developing and of course on the live side anyways, and way more. This is a repeat of the session I did at the DNN Summit in spring 2021, and I hope you will love it. The goal of our session today is that you can get this set up to go within minutes and just get going. So what is the whole thing about? First of all, you need to know that we're going to create a single page application. That basically means when I click, something happens but the page does not reload. Our demo today is going to use Angular because we've prepared all of it for this, but you could do the same thing with any other kind of a SPA framework, whether that's React or Vue or whatever your favorite poison is. Now, just in case you've never even tried this, one of the great reasons for integrating it into DNN, of course, is that you have a platform which has way more functionality and you just need to extend it with your functionality that you developed. And so from the view of DNN, adding Angular allows you to add some cool functionality that looks great. And from the view of Angular, you're building on top of a platform which already has a lot of features, whether it's a blog or other content management. So these things will really help each other just to create awesome solutions. You could use it for business applications or just whatever UIs you want to build out of it. Now, the challenges we're going to tackle is basically just getting into a DNN page because there are security things, for example, that you need to go through. We want to make sure that while you're developing, you're really efficient. You don't have to restart your system every time you build something. We want to make sure that whatever you're doing at runtime later on is very similar to what you're doing at dev. Because if you would be developing, let's say, in a different system, and then going into DNN, it would always look different because the styles would kind of hurt each other. And there's more things. Let's say you have a live edition running. You want to show the customer an update, but don't want the rest to see it. We're going to cover that as well. And we're going to make sure that whatever you're doing, calling backend APIs, etc., it's going to include all the DNN headers that you need. So very realistic without having a bunch of cross-origin issues and things like that. So that's kind of where we want to go. And so awesome would be if it's fast and efficient because we even have hot reloading. While I'm typing and saving, bam, the DNN page should automatically reload. It should look real and it should be multi-edition. That's what would be awesome, and that's what we're going to do. So let's look at our current demo first from the view of an end user. Here I have a browser in anonymous mode. I have a little Angular application here. It shows me a little bit of content. I can click on things. You might notice the route up here will change while I'm clicking. I can go to another page, and this one does a backend call to get data for me from the backend. I can also call real backend web APIs and get some debug information. So this is kind of like the final product, how the end user would see it. Now, I'm going to log in as a super user now. Let me just quickly check that I'm not missing something. Yeah, no, right. The next one is just the same thing, but as a super user. And this is basically what I get. I'm now logged on. And the first thing you'll notice is this bar up here where I can say I'm currently on live. And what I see here matches what the end user sees. But you'll notice here, for example, for this test, I updated my app and I added something to the title in the staging edition, which my customer would see, but not the end user. You see, there's another word here. So this way, on the live DNN, I have multiple editions, and I can pre-release it for a certain target audience, and they can have a look at it, say it's fine, go ahead, and then I can go live with my changes. Except for that, at the moment it feels like it's going to be doing the very same thing, except that I also have a button local. And that is my development environment. If I click on this right now, it's going to tell me something isn't running yet because it's not. So to see this in action, we are now going to look at the whole thing using hot reloading. which means I'm going to go into Visual Studio Code and I'm going to start the ng-serve. I'm going to run a task and I'm going to say, okay, I want to run the local edition using SSL in my case because my website uses SSL and I'd have some issues otherwise. And it's now starting the normal Webpack dev server, which is kind of standard in any Angular application. So remember, up until now, the output just said, look, something isn't working yet. We are now going to start this, and it says it has compiled successfully. I hope you can see my screen. We now have the situation that Visual Studio Code says it's been compiled successfully, but if I press here and I go into debug mode, it'll still say something's not working. The reason is that I'm using an untrustworthy SSL certificate on my demo here. You might end up with that as well, so let me just show you what to do. There's a link here just going to one of these files. I'll quickly click on it and tell Chrome that yes, for now, let us trust this. If I did this now, I can now refresh this page again, and you'll now see I now actually have this coming from my localhost environment. In other words, what I have now is, here's the word different, which you previously already saw in my staging, and I'm going to remove that now. In the title here, I'm going to remove this, and I'm only going to hit save. You'll see down there the compiler will run again. And if I switch over here, it's already been reloaded without me doing anything. That's hot reloading, and that is really, really cool. So before we go into the details, let me quickly introduce myself so you have an idea who's telling you all of this. So I'm Daniel. In the internet, I usually go by the iJungleBoy name because I was actually born in the jungle of Indonesia. So I was born in '78. I speak a lot of languages, and I started programming on the Bible translation computer of my parents. That's kind of like how I got into it. When I came to Switzerland around 94, 95, I had to learn German again. I founded a company, and then a few years later, we started using DNN. And in 2012, we developed Dnn-Sxc just because we realized that DNN just doesn't really have content management features. It's a platform, but it's missing multi-language, it's missing automatic picture resizing, it's missing so many things that you need for content management. And that's what we did. So I've been a DNN MVP since 2015, and this is my team, in case you ever meet one of them or see one of them in our videos. So let's have a quick look at the building blocks of what I just showed you before and how to get this working. On one hand, we have an NPM package called Dnn-Sxc-Angular, which will kind of like bridge DNN to Angular. We have a Razor integration layer, which basically just helps to boot the Angular in the page. And we have a template app. By the way, both Dnn-Sxc-Angular, the template app, the Razor integration, all of this is open source. You'll find it on GitHub. Just check out the blog, which will go together with this video. Now, if we look at the features, what we have here, we have the additions, live, staging, local. We have the integration layer, making sure it runs in DNN no matter which scenario I'm working on right now. We have hot development, which is really cool. Then we have an additional feature to make sure that if there's a form inside my Angular application, it'll be protected from accidentally submitting, because there's a kind of a bug in ASP.NET because the whole page is a form. If you have an input field and you hit enter anywhere, it'll just submit the page and reload it, which sucks. Then we're passing in the DNN context, like what page am I on, what module am I on into Angular. That's important for all the API requests to work as expected. We have an HTTP interception layer, which makes sure that I can just write Angular code to talk with HTTP, and all the requests will automatically get the headers it needs to talk in DNN. There's a data access layer to get data. There's a UI integration for editing. Let me just give you a quick peek of that. So let me check out the team here, and let's say Anna Marie just changed her name. And I can go in here and say whatever her name is now. Awesome. I'll save this. Oh, missed the button there. And now it'll save it and just update her name right here. So that's the integration part of the content management UI. And there's the whole dev automation to deploy the stuff that we're building. That's what we're all going to look at in the next about 30 minutes. Let's see how this whole thing integrates into DNN, because that's kind of tricky. And you'll see quickly, the code that we're going to look at is part of the template app, which again, you can just download and try for yourself. So let's have a look at this code. I'm going to close this title component here, which we do not need for now. And we're going to go to the main entry file so you have an idea what's happening. This is the Angular app Razor file, which will kind of include the published version for end users or the development version for developers. Basically what we're doing here is we're saying we're probably going to need some editing features here. Then we're going to add a base tag to the page because Angular routing needs that to happen. And then here we're just creating we're going to load some helper code, which would just make this file too big. This is over here for loading various editions of our code. Then we're going to check if it's a super user. We're going to show him the option to choose between these editions. And then depending on which edition we're on, we're either going to load it from ngserve or we're going to load it from the HTML that was generated when I compiled my Angular application. That's basically all there is to it. I'm going to skip the editions part because that's basically just remembering a cookie and making sure which part is being shown. But let's look at the Angular part because this is kind of like where the magic is happening. There is two important functions here, just so you've seen it once. There's one which will take the HTML, which Angular made, and just extract the right parts that it needs. We need this because Angular will create different index files on each compile so that partial loading and stuff like that will work. So that's really important and cool. But basically all we're doing is we're extracting the parts we need, and then you see with the regex and stuff, and then returning it to the output. Very simple. And in case of the hot reloading scenario, we have the message you noticed before, and we're just going to get the core 5 files, which we always have in a hot reloading scenario, and the rest, even like partial loading and everything, will just work. So if you don't understand everything I said, then you probably have never used Angular before. So don't worry, whatever platform you use, the idea will be similar. But yes, if you've never used Angular before, this video might be a little too early for you. Then just do some tutorials in Angular, and then you'll be really glad you have this. So what it basically does, multiple editions, we mentioned that. Edition selection, you've seen that. We're loading the generated parts live in staging based on the edition, and we have the hot reloading built in as well. And this is all open source. You can use different configurations, or you can just rewrite the code to whatever you need. Whatever you need. So we have all these functionalities that you see here, and that already is going to save you hundreds of hours when working in DNN. We need this in all our DNN Angular projects, and we have quite a few of them actually. So let's look at the Angular integration, and that's kind of like, so right now we looked at, this is the part that happens in DNN, but what about Angular? Because it probably needs something too. And let's have a quick peek at this part of the code. I'm going to close the Razor files now, and I'm going to go into our template app here, which has an ng folder for Angular and a source folder containing all of our code. And I'm going to start here in the app folder, and let me just close the module here. I'm going to go into the app module. Okay. Basically, all we're doing in here is we are adding our core modules here from Dnn-Sxc-Angular. It's on NPM, by the way. And we don't really have to do a lot, just making sure we import this, because this will help to automatically reconfigure the HTTP client to just use the new headers which DNN will need for backend calls. And there's one more detail which has to work, and that is the entry-level component must inherit from the Dnn App component. That's just because this is the earliest time the integration can do anything. And here it can pick up like hidden variables from the page and stuff like that, so that everything will just work. If all this is done, you've integrated DNN back into Angular. So with the razor, we get Angular into DNN. With these two steps, we get the DNN information that Angular needs to work into Angular. Let's see what this means. So the Dnn App component, when we're inheriting and doing this thing, it'll pick up the page and module context. That's because a lot of the backend calls will need like headers like tab ID 75 or module ID 1240, so that the backend knows what page is a user on and what module. It's also going to pick up the security token, because otherwise the backend will refuse to answer HTTP calls. It's going to initialize the HTTP interceptor and just make sure that all the calls to DNN will have the headers. And it's going to automatically disable enter equals submit, which will break so many Angular apps. So there's, by the way, some magic happening in the background, just making sure if you do it wrong, it's going to warn you while compiling or very early on. Because again, some of these things should happen just once in a whole application. But all of that is taken care of. Just give it a try. Let me just give you a bit of an insight what the HTTP interceptor does, because a lot of you have probably never heard of this. In Angular, I can always use the HTTP client to make a backend call. Now, if all of these calls might need extra headers, you don't want to program that into each call. So what we've done is we've prepared an interceptor which just says, okay, you're going to call this endpoint. Let me add the security header. Let me tell the backend what page I'm on, module I'm on. And that's basically all it's going to do. It's going to set all these headers. It's also going to catch paths, like if you're just accessing app/content/blog post/75, it's going to expand it to the full path which you currently need based on the DNN that you're on. So it's going to do all of that correctly. And if you're also like in a testing API, like you have your custom APIs and they have a different path, it's going to do all of that automatically too. So it's pretty cool. Yeah, and that'll make it easy for you to access content data, queries, and web APIs, which we'll look at next. Because that's what we're going to check out right now. What if we need to access data from DNN? Let's quickly recap. We have a running system here, currently in local mode, which means if I'm in Visual Studio Code, this is the stuff that is running right now. If I make a change, it'll automatically update it. I have in this tutorial app, I have a folder called examples, which contains everything that you actually see here. The idea is you could just kill that folder and start building your own stuff and be going really, really quickly. So here we have the team, and we have some minor features like filtering and stuff like that. And this is all done in Angular. So let's have a quick peek at the code inside team. We have a person model, of course, nothing exciting. It has an ID, a global ID, a name, and a photo. And we have a team service which will get the data. So how does it do that? Well, we're going to work with RxJS observables. That's a convention in Angular which is kind of like a promise, but it's a promise that can be triggered again, again, and again. Basically, in a promise, you say, I'm going to get this data, I'm going to get it back, and then I'm going to do something with it. With an observable, you're saying, I'm going to subscribe to data, and whenever something changes, I would like to be informed again so that I can update my user interface and stuff like that. So basically, we have a little tiny bit of code here, but in general, the only thing we care about right now, let's first talk about getting the business units, by the way. Making it simpler, these up here. We're just going to talk about getting the 4 business units, these terms. Let's look at the business unit. We have a business unit model, name and description, amazing. And we have UI, which is going to get these. And actually all we're going to do is we're going to ask for the data object, which is part of the Dnn-Sxc-Angular, to just say, please data, give me a content stream. That's what the dollar here stands for. I'm expecting data of this business unit model, and I just want it from business unit. That's it. If we do this on this page, let me go back into F12. I'll just reload the page and get all the backend calls, and you'll see it's just going to get here the business units based on that full path, which is automatically built. and it's going to get the JSON data back with these 3 items. That's how we get them. Pretty simple. And as long as I don't filter anything here, you don't know about this, but if I do set 1, it'll put it in the path, and the content service will then pick it up and get this data here from the back end. So let's have a quick peek. So that was the business unit part, the simple just get data. And the team service will pick up the selected business unit, which is basically just listening to changes in the path, right? And then it'll get the data from a query in the backend. And the query in the backend is configured to listen to the business unit name. The query name is business unit team. And it's going to get this data from the backend. Let me quickly show you how that works. Because you've probably never worked with queries before. Here's the query, which basically says I have cached data. I'm only going to give the data along that has been published. If it's an admin, he can also see unpublished, that kind of stuff. I need the person data, and either I'm going to filter it by business unit web or IT or whatever. And if it doesn't actually match, he's just going to get all the persons anyways and pass them on sorted to the output. That's what this query does. And we're calling it here in the code by just saying, I'm going to call a query. I'm expecting data person to come back, and the query name is like this, and the parameter that I'd like to pass in is that. So fairly straightforward. You have to understand the concepts a bit, but your code doesn't grow exponentially because you had to add all the headers and resolve the paths and all that. It just works, which is really neat. So let's go back to the thing here. What do we have here? We have very simple APIs like content stream, query stream, API stream, just to get data. Let's quickly have a quick peek at the API, by the way. Same thing here. If I go to web API examples, I'm getting data from the backend like hello Michael. And the concept is the same. In here I have an example of the demo. I'm just going to call the API simple, or I'm going simple and I'm going to call hello, or I'm going to call something and giving it parameters. And in the backend, it's going to call this API controller simple, either the hello, the numbers, or the something. Makes sense, right? It's all together in one place. Just part of it is running in the browser, part of it is running on the server. And as you can see, I'm calling hello Michael. The result is hello Michael, and that's what I can see here. So just try out the tutorial app. It's really simple to get started, and it'll help you get a feeling for all of this. Now, back to where we were. We have API calls. We have ways to get it for single calls, but we can also make like an object mapped to that API to make lots of calls, depending on what you need. Yeah. So it's really easy to use, especially to use visual query, because you've already created the query. Maybe you've needed it in a Razor template. Now all you want to do is call it. Remember, if you use any kind of backend, whether it's visual query or your own controller, you need the permissions to be configured. On a controller, you do this with attributes, like with allow anonymous. And on the queries, you do it in the configuration where you say what users are allowed to access this query. So don't forget that, otherwise it won't work. The tutorial app has all of this configured already. Yeah, and this will also let you access like backend data, for example. Maybe you have SQL data you want to quickly access. We often have scenarios where customers will regularly upload a CSV file, and then we need that data, etc. Whatever you want, just do it. And if you need something super custom, just create your own web API, include it in your app, and you're ready to go. So let's have a quick peek at how the content management integration works. In other words, what you just saw previously here, I was on the team. I had renamed Anna Marie here. I added the term awesome to her name. I'm going to remove that now, and it's gone. So, should not be very difficult, right? Well, let's have a quick look at this. This is very similar to how it's done in Razor templates. So let me quickly close this code. And I'm going to go to my examples and back to the team. So we have the team here. And you'll notice I have a directive here. So in Angular, a directive is like a little bit like a custom tag or a custom attribute, which will trigger my code. So I have a directive, which is Sexy Toolbar. And for the main wrapper, it's going to give it a configuration without an ID. And on the repeating list, it's going to need a toolbar for the person that I'm on. So this means without the ID here, I just have a plus button because that's all it can do right now. And down here, it has edit or delete. So I could also delete a user. So basically, this attribute will do everything for you. It'll create the hovering toolbar, get the positioning right, and all that. The only thing we're doing here is we're telling it a little bit more what configuration we want. Let me quickly go into the components so you have an idea. So the main thing we're just saying, we're going to start with an empty toolbar. That means we don't want to have the normal 20 buttons with admin and queries and all that. We just want to have a simple item toolbar. And we're telling it what content type we have, and we either give it an ID or we don't. And then we have the option where we're creating either we have a person, then we say we're going to want an edit button and a delete button, or we just want a new button. That's all it does. So again, just to recap, the code here is this simple. Add that and you have it. One more detail you might have noticed, here's a refresh information as well. Because by default, the edit dialog will pop up and you'll change the name and hit save. And then normally the page would reload in the background. But we want to intercept that. We don't want the page to reload. We have a single page application. So this will say the dialog is closed. Now my Angular code is going to take over. And the refresh here is actually just going to trigger reloading the data from the backend using these observables that I mentioned before. Okay, so check out the code. You'll see how it works. That's how it works. And as you saw, it's just simple attributes, configuration. It has all the features of the normal toolbar. So in other words, if you're trying to configure this, go to docs.2sexy.org. You'll find everything there documented, how the configuration for these toolbars work. It's the same whether it's Razor, JavaScript, Angular, just this is how you integrate it. Yeah, and so what's really cool is you could use this for any kind of Angular application. It can be a business application, it can be a gallery, an image swiper, something cool with effects. It could also be just a really cool spa blog. Whatever you want to do, this will just work. Now, before we finish this, we're going to look at some minor development automations included in the demo app. Now, you might need something different, but I guess this is a good place to get started, right? Basically, what we have built in is the whole thing to run it in local, to deploy changes of the API code, and of course, to build the result. So let's have a quick peek at that. All of this is configured in the package.json. Wrong one here. Oh, wait, up here. Yeah. So we have one command called local and local SSL. The difference is whether it's going to provide HTTPS or not. If you're running your development system with HTTPS, you're going to also need the local server to use HTTPS or it will fail. So basically to run this, let me just stop this again so that we have the effect. I can go to npm script, start here, local SSL, hit play. And now it's going to start the server. You'll notice right now it's broken temporarily. And if I wait 5 or 10 seconds, or it might actually pick it up itself. No. If I refresh now, it should at any time now pick up the application from local. So that was one thing. Let's stop this again. What I can also do is I can build to staging. You might remember in the current version, the staging has this extra word different. Now I'm going to say, let's just build to staging and it's going to deploy to that edition. right? So let's do that here. Build to staging, hit play. And it's now going to run the normal Angular compiler. And as a post-production step, it's going to call this deploy publish.js, which will deploy it to this path here. If all you want to do is just change the path, go ahead. If your setup is more sophisticated, you can of course completely change the post-build step to have a different JavaScript, a different automation, and publish it to there too. So if this is done running, this will probably take a few seconds. I can now go back here, and it will not have hot reload, of course, because this is coming from the real web server. But if I refresh now, the word different should be missing, which you can see right now. So to finish this off, we have all these automations built in, but you can just adjust it to whatever you need. Now, to close this off, thank you so much for watching. We just made some major enhancements this spring in 2021. So we're really looking forward to you guys testing it, using it, and giving us feedback. If you're just watching this video on YouTube, check out the description for the link to the blog containing all the references to further documentation, the demo app, Dnn-Sxc-Angular on NPM, etc. And so what I'd really love from you now is that you just give it a try and give us feedback. Tell us what we could do better and create awesome solutions using this. Thank you very much for watching. Daniel Mettler from 2SIG Internet Solutions for the DNN and 2Sexy community.